So let's see, going on to my Dharma talk now. Even though the Buddhism and Star Wars, finding your place in the galaxy seminar was put on hold due to the pandemic, I never actually really stopped working on it. Whereas originally I planned it to be like a 2-hour seminar. So now, some 5 months later, after working on it for 5 months, I have basically enough material for a 3-day seminar. Don't laugh. Okay, not 3 full days, but maybe like 3 sessions on 3 consecutive days, 3 consecutive weeks rather. But actually, even back in March, when I was working on it, leading up to the date, I'd already realized that in order to fit it within the 2-hour time restriction that I had set for myself, I really had to cut a lot of important material, or as we might say, a lot of really juicy material. And so in that sense, having to postpone the seminar has turned out to be a good thing, because in the intervening time I re-examined these 3 movies of the sequel trilogy, and I think discovered many more things that I hadn't realized before, and I have the opportunity to now to adjust the format to better fit the material. So I'll be announcing some dates soon, and so if you're interested, please let me know if you have my email, but if not, you can send an email to the temple's email, which is hhbt-la.org. I'll put it in the comments here. So yeah, if you're interested, send an email to the temple and let me know. But for my talk today, I'd like to share with you a fascinating aspect of one of these movies that I recently discovered, and the particular movie is The Last Jedi. So this particular movie, this particular segment of this movie, will be included in the seminar when I do it, but probably will be in a more simplified form because this segment is actually focused on the character known as Luke Skywalker. I'm sure most of you, or all of you, know that character. But my seminar itself would actually be focused primarily on the central character of the sequel trilogy, which is Luke's student, the young female Jedi, Rey. But I think this particular segment that focuses on Luke, really stands on its own, and I hope you find it interesting. But I wanted to say that first, I do realize that you may or may not have seen The Last Jedi, and even if you did, you may or may not have liked it. The reason I say it is because this movie was the second in the sequel trilogy, and it's said to have split the Star Wars fandom basically in 2. Those that liked it and those that, well, I won't say didn't like it, but those that, some of whom, how social media kind of blows things out of proportion, but in social media there are those that actually despised it or hated it. Primarily, I think, because of its very different portrayal of Luke Skywalker. And to be honest, at first I myself didn't necessarily appreciate it, having been a Star Wars aficionado since I saw Luke as the hero in the original trilogy back in 1977. But it's amazing what 5 months of reappraisal can do. But anyway, I think most of you know that the character of Luke, it's played by Mark Hamill, was the central hero in the original trilogy back in 1977. I think, and then the Empire Strikes Back, and then The Last Jedi was the last movie of that trilogy, which ended, I think, in 1983. But the Luke that we see in The Last Jedi in the sequel trilogy is 30 years older. And because of the failures and missteps that he experienced as a Jedi Master in the intervening years between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, Luke has gone into exile. It's a little like Shinran's story in a way. And now, while it's understandable that this new Luke, so to speak, turned off many in the Star Wars fandom, in my opinion, actually, as a Buddhist, it's actually precisely his failures that make his story, resonate with the Buddhist teachings. Kind of ironically, right? But however you might feel about The Last Jedi, I do think that there's a certain series of events in it that are quite moving, and the reason that they're moving is because they resonate with one of the most important concepts in Buddhism, and this is the concept known as Parinirvana. You may have heard this term, Parinirvana, which is the complete and final cessation of our human suffering. In everyday English, I think it's what we might think of as dying a good death, or dying without any regrets. And so now the question is, how does Parinirvana relate to Luke's story in The Last Jedi? Well, earlier in The Last Jedi, earlier in the film, Luke had experiences that prepared him to be able to experience Parinirvana, or a good death. And one of these experiences is when Rey, the young heroine in the sequel trilogy, and the student that he's been reluctantly teaching, actually rejects him as her teacher. And those of you who've seen the movie know that their disagreements stem from the fact that Rey has been sent by the Resistance to not only train with Luke as a master, Luke the Jedi Master, but to bring him back out of exile so that he can help the Resistance, because the Resistance is suffering tremendous losses. But Luke refuses to return to the fight because he's afraid of failure. And the failure is that many years earlier, Luke had been training his nephew Ben, but that had not gone well, and Ben ended up, as it's said in Star Wars terminology, turning to the dark side of the Force. And in fact, Ben has become the leader of the evil First Order, and is now known not as Ben, but as Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. So you can see he took a turn to the dark side. And then because of Kylo Ren's, really scary and growing dark power, and then Luke's refusal to help the Resistance, Rey eventually becomes so frustrated with Luke that she leaves. And this is a tremendous blow to Luke's ego, right? And then soon after that, Luke's own teacher, the Jedi Master Yoda, I'm sure you all know Yoda from the original trilogy, Yoda visits him and basically agrees with Rey and says to Luke, yes, you failed Ben, and you lost him to the dark side, but we must not lose Rey. That's what Yoda says to Luke. And he tells Luke to share with Rey what he's learned from his failures, and that, quote, failure, the greatest teacher is. So these are very difficult negative truths for Luke to face, but they end up forcing him to clearly see his mistakes, to acknowledge his fear and self-attachment. And then the positive aspect of this is that he's finally able to see what's really, really happening around him. And he reconnects with the Resistance and decides to go help them. But of course, at this point in the story, the Resistance is in a most desperate situation. They've barricaded themselves in a cave, and they need to somehow buy time to figure out how to escape. And meanwhile, the overwhelming artillery, military might of the evil First Order, which is headed by none other than Supreme Leader Kylo Ren himself, is right outside the cave. So it's a very dire situation indeed. And once Luke decides to return and help the Resistance, it looks like they're facing certain death. They have their, so to speak, their backs against the wall. Somehow, Luke shows up in their cave, and then, from that point, walks out to face the military power of the First Order alone. And by the way, I'm going to show some scenes here from The Last Jedi, but to avoid any video copyright issues, I'm mainly going to show screen captures here at this point. So here's Luke having emerged from the cave where the resistance is held up. Here's him facing the First Order's what are called the gigantic guerrilla walkers. That's what they're called. They're really scary, basically like tanks kind of that with tremendous firepower. And so then, speaking of tremendous firepower, one of the walkers fires on Luke, and then all of the guerrilla walkers fire on Luke. This was at the command of Kylo Ren. This actually goes on for maybe 30 seconds. But somehow Luke emerges from the smoke completely unscathed. And here's Adam Driver, who plays Kylo Ren. This really surprises him. And he decides to go out and face Luke one-on-one. So here's Adam Driver as Kylo Ren on the left with his red lightsaber, and then Luke on the right with his blue lightsaber, facing each other down. And Kylo swings at Luke, and we see in this series of this fight scene some amazing moves by Luke. But what's interesting is all of the moves that Luke does are defensive moves. He never actually strikes at Kylo Ren. Eventually, Kylo charges at Luke, but this time when he swings at Luke, Luke does not dodge, but just stands there motionless, and Kylo's lightsaber blade goes right through Luke, right through. But he's not hurt. And so then in this scene here, you can see Kylo goes, wait a minute. He goes back and basically slowly stabs Luke right through the middle there, and realizes that Luke is not really there at all. So this is really interesting. And then the film immediately cuts away back to the island of Ahch-To, which is the island where Luke had been exiling himself all along. And here we see Luke in classic Buddhist lotus posture, in deep meditation. It's a close-up of Luke in meditation. So in other words, Luke never left Ahch-To, but using an advanced power of the Force that's known as force projection, he has essentially teleported himself, or a kind of three-dimensional avatar of himself, to the battle where the resistance is facing the First Order, and he's completely fooled Kylo. See, Kylo thought that this was the end of the resistance. They could wipe out the resistance forever because they're holed up in this cave, but Luke comes and basically delays them so that the resistance can escape. And so when Kylo realizes what's happened, and that now the resistance has probably had time to escape, he's extremely upset, and he screams "No" very, very loudly. Now I want to show you the last few. I was going to show you the last few sort of clips of this segment here, but what I'm going to do is show you the video. But I've removed the audio for obvious copyright reasons. But let's watch this very short half a minute clip here, and where you'll see Luke as he's ending this force projection, and his face is an expression of his complete realization of peace. And then you'll see him let go, and as he lets go of his life, his body begins to vanish as he becomes one with the Force. And then finally, we'll see his empty cape blowing away in the wind. So let's watch this short clip here. I don't know if you were able to see at the very end there that Luke vanishes and his cape is left, and his cape just blows away in the wind. Luke dies because, why does he die? Because the use of force projection requires so much life force that it's fatal. So this is the end of the segment that I wanted to share with you from The Last Jedi. So, oh, by the way, in that scene, in case you're wondering what the audio was the Force theme. You know, the dun 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 dun. So hopefully that wasn't a copyright infringement right there, but you can imagine that, you know, really moving Force theme playing in the background of Luke's, basically Luke's sacrifice. So, you know, of course there are fantastic, you know, superhuman powers that the Jedi have that's on display here, but I think that what gives this sequence its emotional power is something that's directly related to the Buddhist teachings themselves. We witness there Luke sacrificing his life to save the resistance. He knew that the force projection, the use of force projection is a fatal use of the force. But it's this selfless sacrifice, not the force power that's on display, I think, that is most impressive. I think that Luke's sacrifice represents an ultimate altruistic act that actually also strongly resonates with the emphasis that we see in the Mahayana branch of Buddhism, which our Shin Buddhist tradition is part of. The Mahayana, you know, rose in prominence 3 or 4 centuries after Shakyamuni Buddha passed away, and they clarified the essential point of the Buddha's teaching, which is, to the Mahayana, being a Buddhist was no longer simply a matter of simply attaining my own enlightenment. It was a matter of working for the enlightenment of all beings. This is reflected in the 3 treasures. I take refuge in the Sangha. May we together as one, uniting in harmony, strive to live for the enlightenment of all beings. And actually, you know, in the deepest sense of our what Buddhism calls our interdependence, our interconnectedness, my attaining enlightenment depends on all beings also attaining enlightenment. And so the compassionate, I guess we'd say the compassionate use of wisdom, or, you know, in the terminology of Star Wars, the compassionate use of the Force should not be for one's own benefit, but for the benefit of others. I think this is what Luke's sacrifice signifies. Now, as I mentioned in my opening, ultimately Luke's sacrifice resonates with the important Buddhist concept of Parinirvana, which is the complete and final extinguishing of our self-caused suffering, and which, you know, only happens at death. But, you know, in Buddhism, death is not a negative thing. I think it may sound kind of paradoxical, but I think Parinirvana is the good death that we all want. In other words, when we're on our deathbed, we want to be able to let go and die peacefully. We don't want to be saying, you know, if only I'd done this, if only I'd said that, and so forth. But in order to experience Parinirvana, like Luke, we must be able to let go of our self-attachment and thus be able to open up to the preciousness and the interconnectedness of all life. I think this insight is what Luke Skywalker received when his student Rey deserted him, and when his teacher Yoda reminded him to learn from his failures. I think it's the person who has learned these most important lessons that can then experience Parinirvana at death. So this scene from The Last Jedi, you know, which ends with as we saw, Luke's empty cape blowing away in the wind, expresses this kind of truly Buddhist, truly selfless death. He's lived his life fully and compassionately. He gave his life to save his friends. And he was then able to completely let go of everything in total peace. Thank you for listening. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.